Hello, everyone. Welcome to dinanddaf. This is Elana Stein Hain. Today, we are going to talk about Breira. And Breira is basically, I guess we could call it retroactively applying something that happens in the future to the present. And let's just look straight at an example. Chullin daf yadalid amud aleph. The question that is being asked is, how is it possible that Rabbi Yehuda, who requires things to be designated for whatever use they're going to have on the festival, to already be designated for that before the festival starts, how does he think it's allowed, it's permissible, to slaughter an animal on Yom Tov for food? After all, the animal was not presumed to be used for that purpose before Yom Tov. It's not what's called min hamuchan. So the answer that is given is omedet la'achila ve'omedet lagadel. Animals in general are presumed to either be used for food or for breeding. But nishcheta, if it gets slaughtered on the festival, bרירה, it becomes clear, let's say retroactively, zila'achila omedet, that actually on Erev Yom Tov, before the holiday started, it was already designated for eating. Lo nishcheta, if it was not slaughtered, it is retroactively clarified that it is for breeding. So here what we have is, on Erev Yom Tov, you didn't actually know whether this thing was going to be used for eating or for breeding, but on Yom Tov itself, when the animal gets slaughtered, retroactively we now know that it was presumed, it was designated for eating. Welcome to Breira. Now, what is the logic behind this? So I want to amass a few examples of Breira first, and then we'll go into the logic, at least from one perspective. So here's another very well-trodden example, or here's a very well-trodden example of Breira that is quoted absolutely everywhere, including in our Gemara and Chullin. The Mishnah in Demai puts it like this: Halokeach yain mibein hakutim, if somebody buys wine from the Samaritans, this is before the decree not to buy unpasteurized or use unpasteurized wine that belonged to Gentiles. If the person says, Omer, they say, Shnei lugin sha'adni atid lahafrish, 2 lug, liquid volume, 2 lug of wine that I in the future will separate from this. Harehen truma, they are considered truma now. Va'asara maaser, and the 10 that I will separate after that are considered a tithe now. V'tisha maaser sheni, and the next 9 that I will in the future separate is for secondary tithes. Mechel v'shoteh, and I'm going to use mechel here, even though there's a machloket as to what it means. I'm going to say a person may drink it immediately, meaning it is as though truma has already been taken. Maser has already been taken, because in the future, you will take some of this and set it aside as truma and maser, and it is now already that. Wow, that is bרירה. Okay, the Tosefta puts this a little bit differently, just because it gives you a little more context. The Tosefta tells you, well, why didn't you actually separate the liquid volume of wine that you wanted to have as truma and you wanted to give as maser? Because it was Erev Shabbat. Halokeach yain mibein hakutim me'erev Shabbat. A person bought that wine on Friday. V'shachach, and they forgot, v'lo hifrish, and they didn't separate truma and maser before Shabbos. They forgot. Or as our Gemara puts it, it was late on Friday, and late on Friday I don't remember if it's our Gemara or elsewhere, late on Friday. And they just didn't have a chance, right? So in the Tosefta, though, as opposed to just making it everybody agrees that you're allowed to drink now, meaning bרירה works here, that's Rabbi Meir's opinion. But Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon say no, okay? They give a reason why in the Tosefta. It's quoted in our Gemara. I'm not so interested in going into it right now. But here's another example of where retroactively, after the fact, whatever it is that you end up being mafrish, that you end up separating for truma and maser, before the fact, we say, no problem. In the present, it's as though they were already taken out and you can drink from it. But Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Huda and Rabbi Yossi disagree with that. Okay? Another example. Ha'omer, somebody who says, Maser sheyesh li beveiti. The secondary tithes that you're supposed to bring to Jerusalem, but often they're too heavy, so instead you decide to redeem them and take the money, redeem them with money, exchange them with money, and bring that money to Jerusalem and spend it there. But so if I have Maser Sheni in my house and I say, it is going to be redeemed on whatever coin I take out of my pocket. Meaning I have a number of coins in my pocket and I'm just going to reach in and whatever comes out, right? I haven't reached in yet. I'm not holding it yet. Again, Rabbi Yossi Omer Mechulal, Rabbi Yossi says, no problem. The redemption worked based on whatever coin is going to come out of your pocket in the future. Why? The Yesh B'rira. We say retroactively, whatever you take out, that was the coin. Okay? So these are very interesting examples. The stakes don't feel particularly high for the modern person. I would say the Mishnah in Gittin has a little bit of a different valence. Amar lelavlar, a man says to a scribe, Ktov, I want you to write in the get. I want you to write in the written of divorce. Le'ezo she'ertze agaresh. I can divorce whoever I want with this document. Pasul legaresh. Mishnah says, no way, not allowed. No b'rira here is what the Gemara explains. No, 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 no. That is not a good get. A get has to be written, l'shem ha'isha, has to be written in the name of the woman who is going to be divorced with it. Okay, so a little bit higher stakes here. And then the Gemara in Gittin continues and says, well, what about like a similar situation? Ba'minei Rav Hoshaya and Rav Yehuda. Rav Hoshaya asks Rav Yehuda, and I want us to note always that there's a difference between Rav Yehuda, who's an Amora, and Rabbi Yehuda, who is a Tana. Okay? Amar lo Lablar, if somebody says to a scribe, Ktov le'ezo shetetze bepetach tchila. He makes the yiftach mistake. He says, write that this divorce document applies to whomever comes out of the entrance first, meaning this person is obviously married to a few people, and whoever comes out of the entrance first, that's who the get is for. Mahu, what's the halacha? Is that a good get or not? I mean, I would say it's not a good get, but is it a valid get? Amarle. So he says, well, what do you mean? Tznitua, we already have this in the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah had said, Yeter Mikain, in addition to all the other earlier examples in the Mishnah, Amar lo Lavlar, if somebody says to a scribe, you should write in the get, whomever I want, I will divorce. Pasul legareshbo, you can't use it, right? Alma ein b'rira, meaning there's no b'rira. So, meaning, why should there be a difference between a situation where he says, whomever will come out of the gate first, or the entryway first, is going to be divorced, versus whomever I wish to be divorced? Isn't that the same b'rira? And the truth is, the Gemara in Gittin, which goes through an extensive conversation, a discussion about b'rira, actually suggests that there is a difference between different b'rira, potential b'rira situations, right? Amar le Rav Misharshia le Rava. Rav Misharshia says to Rava, Ha Rabbi Shimon, I have to tell you, we would be following Rabbi Shimon, Ditola bedat atzmo lately b'rira, that somebody who actually, the unknown is actually what the person herself or himself is going to do. Where that's the case, and that's the unknown that's going to unfold in the future, we say, no b'rira. That's what Rabbi Shimon says. And we're going to see what Rabbi Shimon would be talking about. But v'tola b'dat achirim, but if it's about what somebody else is going to choose, and it doesn't have to be literally somebody else, it could just be the universe, right? Whichever coin comes out of my pocket, then itle b'rira, then b'rira can obtain. Okay? This is a very interesting distinction. So the Gemara continues and says, okay, let's talk about this. Toleh b'dat atzmo leitle b'rira, the idea that Rabbi Shimon thinks that there's no b'rira in the case where a person is planning on unfolding the future themselves. Hada Amran, it's what we were talking about. And what we were talking about was actually the case of the wine, right? Where the person said, what I am going to in the future set aside for truma is already truma, right? And you remember Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yehuda said, no des. It was Rabbi Meir who said, okay. But Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yossi said, no, that doesn't work, right? But what's toleh b'dat achirim? What's an example of the thing that has to unfold is unfolding based on someone else. And there, eat le bרירה. Maybe Rabbi Shimon would say, there is bרירה. Titania, as we learn at the Breita, hareini bo'alich al menat sheyirtzeh Abba. A man says to a woman, I am sleeping with you to betroth you. Very unconventional, right? In Amoraic times, we say this is something quite frowned upon. But I am sleeping with you to betroth you, but only on condition that my father will approve, right? It really depends on his father. So one opinion is whether the father wants it or not, the woman is betrothed. But that's not our interest right now. What we're interested in is Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, Omer Mishum Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Shimon, Ratzah ha'av mikudeshet, if the father wants it, she is betrothed, right? If the father approves, she is betrothed. Lo ratzah ha'av ina mikudeshet. But if the father doesn't want it, she's not betrothed, right? Meaning, he says, bרירה obtains. So in the case of toleh b'dat atzmo, a person is the one who is going to be making the unfolding of the future. We do not say that that unfolding of the future actually informs the present, right? So yeah, it's true. I'm going to take some liquid measure volume out of this yayin, but whatever liquid measure volume I take out of this yayin is not already determined right now. Whereas if somebody is going to walk out of the front door, whoever walks out of the front door, we can say that's the person who is meant for this get, perhaps. Or the example that's actually given right here to try to say, where does Rabbi Shimon say it? Toleh b'dat acherim. If you're depending on somebody else's opinion, literally opinion, right? A man who sleeps with a woman and says, this is betrothal so long as my father will approve. She says, okay, if the father's going to approve, we say bרירה. Retroactively, there was approval, even at the time, or at least approval in theory, in potential, at the time of the intercourse. Now, what is all of this? What a fascinating thing. First of all, what is this concept of bרירה? What are we saying here? That this is like Back to the Future, right? Like Back to the Future is like the past messes up the future. Well, this is like the opposite of Back to the Future. It's back to the past, right? It's the future impacts the past, or right now it's the present, but it will become the past, right? It impacts that. So what's actually going on here? And then secondarily, what is this difference between toleh b'dat atzmo and toleh b'dat achirim? Why would you make this distinction, right? And I also have a third question that I want to add here, which is, what's the difference between these cases of bרירה and just when somebody makes a t'nai, when somebody just makes a condition on something, right? Like we have a case in the Mishnah in Gittin where a husband says to a wife, this is your get on condition that you give me 200 zuz. Of course, that's extortion, but this is your get on condition that you give me 200 zuz. That's just a t'nai. It's not bרירה. So how do we make heads or tails of this bרירה situation? Okay. So Rabbi Eliezer Berkovitz, I just came across a piece that he wrote 60 years ago in a journal called Sinai, where he talks about his understanding of bרירה. And he has 3 building blocks. And I want to look at all 3. It doesn't mean I necessarily agree with his interpretation, but I think it's really interesting and I think it's really cogent and helpful in trying to understand this. He says, first of all, let me explain to you what I think bרירה is philosophically. What does it mean about present and future? He says, man de'it le bרירה, whoever thinks that there is such a thing as this sort of later retroactive clarification that affects the right now. So there thinks sha'atid talui legamre, that future is completely dependent b'sibot shebehoven, in causes that exist right now. Meaning the future is determined by what is happening right now. V'im kain, and if that's the case, that there is a direct line of causation from the present to the future. Mashi yitbarer basof, whatever will be clarified at the end, right? The father wants it, the father doesn't want it. This coin comes out, that coin comes out. This person, lahavdil, comes out of an entryway. This person, right? Hu shaya ra'ui liyot. It's what was already supposed to happen from even the present moment. Whatever happens in the future, it was already supposed to happen from right now. And that's why yesh b'reira. You can go and apply what happens to the right now, because in the right now, it already exists in potential in some way. Therefore, whatever coin comes out, that is the coin that was always supposed to come out. Not always, but meaning from this moment to when it comes out, that is the moment it was supposed to come out, right? And I'm just skipping a little bit. I'm just skipping a little bit. What about people who say there's no b'reira? Meaning who say, no, I don't think that you can take what unfolds and then apply it back. Mandalately b'reira, the one who doesn't think that, Sover thinks she'ein sibot shebehoveh, that the causes in the present do not kovot et ha'atid behechrach, do not necessarily predetermine what's going to happen in the future, right? There is not, maybe there's a dotted line from the present to the future, but there isn't a thick line of causation from the present to the future that is predetermined and necessary. And so you cannot look at what happens in the future and apply it back. You can't, because it wasn't even there in potential at that time. It wasn't even there in potential. That's his first move, a philosophy about time, a philosophy about causation, a philosophy about the relationship between the present and the future. By the way, I think it's very helpful thinking about a lot of the situation right now, the question of what is already going to happen based on the right now, and what are the spontaneous possibilities that we can't even think of, that we wouldn't even think of, that could intervene. And I always hope litova, for good, right? I want to go to the second layer. The second layer, he starts talking about the difference between this tole b'dat atzmo and tole b'dat achirim. That why would somebody think that we shouldn't apply this b'reira, this sense that there is a thick line of causation from right now to the future, and therefore we can apply the future back, when it's something that I am going to make happen in the future, versus when somebody else or the universe is going to make something happen in the future. We're very comfortable with that thick line and saying causation and then apply it back. So Berkovitz talks about this. But I should say, he talks about this, well, let's pause there. He talks about this. So let's see. He says, Begittin kaf ham and aleph to amid bet, and Gittin 25a to 25b, mitpatech hamasa umatan shel Gemara, mikushiyato shel Rav Misharshia. We have a conversation based on Rav Misharshia that that it seems that there's a distinction between somebody who is going to be the one who unfolds the future, right? I'm going to be the one who sets aside the truma and maser. I'm going to be the one who chooses who I want to divorce. Versus when someone else is responsible for what's going to happen, right? Whoever walks through the gate, whichever coin happens to come up in my hand, etc. He says, well, Rashi Sham, Amud Aleph, on Kafhe Amud Aleph 25a, Rashi actually explains what he thinks the difference is. In Dibar Matchil, in the section beginning Amar Abaye. So Pire, she explains the following. Dilma Tolobedat Atzmo, maybe when somebody is actually relying on their future decisions. Leitlan Brera, we cannot say there is a thick line between the future, the present and the future, and then you apply it back. Because because the fact that the person made the condition in the first place of what I will eventually set aside in the future, who I will decide to divorce in the future. Gila b'dato, they have revealed that actually they're wavering a little bit. They're not really sure. And therefore you can't say huvrar d'meikara date lahai. You can't say about whatever unfolds in the future that actually this was this person's perspective and what they were going to do all along. The fact that they made that condition of whoever comes out, whoever I want to divorce, right, means maybe they didn't want to, right? Or maybe they didn't want to divorce this one. You can't draw that thick line. There's a moment of uncertainty in that person's commitment to whatever this is. אבל זה שתלה באחרים גמר בדעתי מעיקר לאיזו שתצא. But somebody who is depending on whatever the world brings them, somebody else is going to come out, whoever chooses to come out, whatever coin comes up. That person has already said, I am committing whoever comes out, whatever comes out, that's what it's going to be, right? So there's more commitment. So Rabbi Berkowitz continues on this line. He says, Mashma midvar, it sounds like from Rashi, Sheshelahi, the question really is, Ima bal hechlit b'dato legaresh ota ha'isha o lo? Has this man really in the present decided to divorce this particular woman in the future or not? When he says, Mishamar, somebody says, Ani rotze legaresh ezo she'ertzeh kishe'ertzeh, I want to divorce whoever I want to when I decide that I want to. Hayim ze be'emet nikra ratzon. You can say that in the present he has actual will to divorce this woman? No way. He doesn't know who he wants to divorce, right? And it says, you know what? The same thing with the wine situation. Lefi zeh, based on this, nomar shebegitin, shanu danin ala braita, when we talk about the braita in Gittin of halokech yain mibein hakutim, which originally comes from Dmai, but somebody who takes wine, who buys wine from the Samaritans, hashe'elahi gamkein, it's the same question. Im yesh gemirat da'at, has the person resolved in their minds, lahafrish, to set aside truma and maaser, shehare eno oseh shu maaseh. I mean, they haven't actually done anything. Va'afilu eno kovea makom, they didn't even set aside a place where the truma is supposed to be, or the maaser is supposed to be. Hayayin hu tevel, the wine right now is halachically inedible because truma and maaser haven't been given. V'hu mafrish bepeh, and all this person is doing is giving a verbal separation of tithes, right? He says, Ein ze shoneh meha, I don't think this is different from ha da'amar le'lavlar, the person who says to the scribe, le'ezo she'ertzeh agarish, whoever I will want to, I will divorce. Gam kan, so here too, ki'ilu amar, it's as though they said, ani rotzeh shetiyeh truma, I want there to be truma, ma she'ertzeh shetiyeh, that which I want to be considered as truma, b'sha'ah she'emtzah kelim, when I find vessels, lahafrish, in order to set it aside. Meaning, lefichach, therefore, yesh b'chol eila, in both of the cases, you can lefakpek b'ritziniyut haratzon, you can ask about the seriousness here in the person's will. I really can't say that right now it's already been determined what they want to do because they've expressed uncertainty. Im yesh kan gmirat dat olo, has this person actually resolved in their mind to do this or not? Right? So that's the second piece. Toleh b'dat achirim, toleh b'dat atzmo. Right? Toleh b'dat atzmo sounds like you're wavering. Toleh b'dat achirim, you've decided whatever happens, you're in. Right? But here's the third level. The third level, he says, I actually want to talk about how this is different from other making of conditions in general. Right? He says, aval bishar hatnaim, other kinds of conditions that people make. Misug shel, like, hareze gitech, this is your get, al menat shetitnili matayim zuz, on condition that you give me 200 zuz. Ein shum safek b'ratzon habal. We know what the guy wants. Hu rotzeh legarish al menat. He wants the divorce on condition. Meaning, it's not wavering what he's doing. He tells us what he wants, and he's waiting to get his money. He says that's different than these other examples of toleh b'dat atzmo, where it makes it clear that he's just not sure if he wants to divorce this person or he wants to divorce this person. If he wants to give this truma, or he wants to give this truma, right? And what he actually, or if he wants to give truma at all. But that's, right? It's a little bit complicated. Whereas when it comes to other Tanaim, he claims that other Tanaim, it's clear that this person is not waffling. Now, I want to just say parenthetically, is it possible that we could find other Tanaim, other conditions where you actually think it indicates that the person is waffling? I think so. I think so. But we still don't say Bרירה there. So it's I don't totally buy it, but I think it's important and I think it's very thoughtful. Now, the last thing I want to do here is I want to return to return to the guy who says, you know, uh, I'm sleeping with you for kiddushin, for betrothal, on condition that my father agrees. Because I think we also have to ask, like, doesn't this person also seem to be indicating that they're wavering and they're not sure? So he argues on the basis of what he just said about Tola B'dat Atzmo versus Tola B'dat Acherim. He actually argues that he thinks that this guy is all in, even now, on Kiddushin. And this is what he says. He says, Eina medubar sham be'ezim novel. We're not talking about a disgusting person. She'ein lo nafka mina, that doesn't care in bi'latot tieh kiddushin or bi'lat znud. That doesn't care if their intercourse is going to result in betrothal or just be promiscuous. Ha'isha ze rotzeh lekadesh. He wants to do kiddushin. Kishematneh al manat she'yirtzeh abba, when he conditions it on condition that my father will approve. Vaday yesh lo al ma lismoch. He must be basing himself on something that he thinks he does approve. Ma'amin hu she'aviv yaskim lenisuav. He believes that his father will agree. V'davka mishum kach hechlit b'libo lekadesh. And that's why he's decided he wants to betroth. Haskamat aviv ki'ilu kvar nimtzeit ba'alam b'koach. His father's agreement is as though already actively, actually in the world, right? At least in potential. Va'al yesod mitziyut zo, and based on this reality, hu mechaven lekiddushin. He means to betroth her. B'ram, however, how are we going to prove? How are we going to prove that the father actually was going to eventually agree, even at the time of the Kiddushin, that he was in the future going to agree? How do we do that thick line from the present to the future? Dafka yisod b'reira. It's based on b'reira. Right? It's based on b'reira. Im yesh b'reira, if there's such a thing as b'reira, meaning that the future is predetermined by the present. Haskamat ha'av haya ra'aya. The agreement, he ra'aya, the agreement of the father is proof, shaya mukhan laskim mikodem, that he was already going to agree even earlier, right? He was already min hamuchan. He was already designated, possible, ready. Vayakan yisod l'kviyat haratzon shel hamekadesh. And that there is a basis for the will of the person doing the betrothing. Avalim ein b'reira, but if there is no b'reira, and there isn't that thick line from the present to the future, haskamat ha'av shebafoal, the agreement of the father, in actuality, hi davar hamasur lemikrim bilti tzvuyim spontaneim. We don't say that that is a natural unfolding of the time when the kiddushin happened. It's actually just something spontaneous, not something we could have assumed would happen. And you cannot base the desire of the betrother to betroth on the basis of this. Now, this is an interesting third step that he makes. Because in his first step, he says, Breira means you look at time a certain way, you look at causality, causation a certain way. In his second point, he says, I think that Tola B'dat Atzmo, you're a little shaky on what you plan to do. And therefore, what you've done is you've basically turned that thick line from the present to the future into a dotted line, because you're not sure. And here, what he said is, I think there are cases where, yeah, of course, your ratzon, we have to figure out if your ratzon is shaky or not. And he's suggesting that in a case where he says, Al manat sheyirtzeh Abba, if my father wants, that that's not indicating that he's shaky, but that he assumes that his father wants, and that all Breira does is it just proves something retroactively to us, right? But it means he was always planning, the man was always planning, assuming that his father wants. Now, this, I have to say, is very different from what I would call like a nominalist position, okay? This whole conversation has been about whether it is true that future events are caused in a straight line by the current reality. by the present. That is really asking a question about what I would say like uh, maybe asking a question about what we know, but also how things come into being. I have a different suggestion, which is there's something called nominalism. And nominalism, it's often in legal systems, is where what you decide creates the reality. I think Brera is by definition a nominalistic concept. Once it happens, you then retroactively go in and say, this is what it was, right? What Berkovitz is looking at Brera as is Brera is actually a clarification of what's always been. But I think if you think of Brera as something that goes in retroactively and changes the past, as opposed to simply being a discovery of what was already in the past, then you're working in a totally different system. You're working in a system of nominalism. And in Halakha, we definitely see that there's nominalism, there's realism. There are certain things that are based on how the world actually works. And then there are other things that are based on this is the reality that we have set. And it's the reality that we've set because the legal system has set it. And I think Brera, you could read either way. As always, thanks for learning with me. Take care.